Welcome back, everybody, to Tactics Ogre. We're still on our way up the, what do they call this place? Hanging Gardens, there we go. Fortunately, there's nothing really much to say, because none of the characters are bosses to this point, so we're just getting introductions to each random battle. It's not a random battle, but each battle, it just, you know, oh look, there's Templars / Dark Knights, and oh, some other beast characters, dragons, what have you, or griffins, or cockatrices. About it. The reason they do that, because they don't want you accidentally, at least to the junction point where all the paths run back together, they don't want you to accidentally pass up a boss character, or, you know, quote unquote, leave a guy alive. You, heaven forbid someone stays alive. That'd be terrible. You know, leave a small hole in the plot. Can only be filled by, you know, you playing all of the levels, which would be silly. Well, it wouldn't be silly. It 100% silly. It would just be kind of silly. My favorite thing in the whole world, well, I'm being sarcastic when I say this, obviously, but my favorite thing in the whole world is getting bills in the mail. You know, normally you get, you know, your regular bills that you expect to be roughly the same every month. So like if you have a car loan, or you have a house loan or house mortgage, you know, you have a set number of months and you're going to pay the bank back or whoever back in a certain amount of time. And, you know, you have the option, from my understanding with most loans, to pay them back early. So, for instance, if your loan is 36 months, you know, you can pay off that loan, or particularly the mortgage, early, by putting more into the principal, you know, etc. And then typically at the end of your loan, this is one of those little fun little things they don't tell you about. Usually at the end of your loan, your last payment, if you have a payment book, will say $0.00. That's just so that they can add up all of the accumulated interest over the years, you know, fractions of cents and late payments and all this other fun jazz. And you'll usually owe or be refunded a certain amount of money. And it's like, say you make let's say you make a $200 payment every month to your car. Just as an example, you get to the end of your car payment, you might owe, instead of owing $200 on your last payment, you might owe like $275, or you might owe $50 or something, you know, or you might have overpaid because you've been paying early on all of your, you know, all your payments have been, you know, a month early or so, you know. You had one that went entirely to principal, so you've been paying down the interest faster than the book said you were. Anywho, point of my story is those are pretty well structured payments, or structured invoice bills, whatever you want to call them. And, you know, those are pretty easy to figure out, pretty easy to take care of. The ones that always kill me are the ones that are based on how much you use. Which, you know, I mean, like for instance, if I, you know, go to my sink and I fill up a gallon of water, you know, I would expect to be charged for a gallon of water. And if I use 10 gallons of water, 100 gallons of water, I would expect to be charged appropriately, you know. But, you know, I'm not measuring out how much water I'm using every month. And electricity is really the hard one for me, is if anyone's paying attention or anyone's watched any of my earlier videos. In the summertime, my bill goes down really far. You know, I pay, you know, somewhere around $100, particularly in the spring and fall when neither the heat nor the air conditioning is on, or it runs very little, if at all. And then in the wintertime, it goes through the roof because my electricity not only is my lighting, but it's also my heat. So when I'm, you know, in the wintertime, my house gets cold, so the heat kicks on. And even though I try to keep it lowish, you know, like not running it at, you know, I'm running it at like 66 degrees or so. Could be for some people very cold. You know, not in my house all that much, so I'm not gonna have my thermostat kick on and go up to 70 degrees for the 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours. We'll say 5 hours that I'm home, from the time I get home from work till the time I go to bed. Then have it kick down while I'm sleeping because I'm under blankets, and then have it rev back up around 6 a.m. for me to get ready to go to work at 7, and then have it go back down while I'm at work. You know, I just leave it at a steady, you know, colder, cooler temperature, you know, something where hopefully the heat kicks on, doesn't overwork itself, trying to, you know, hit a high temperature and then drop down, then hit a high temperature and not drop down. But anyways, part of my story is that in the wintertime my electric bill is very high, like hundreds of dollars instead of $100, hundreds of dollars. But you sort of grit your teeth and you know that, you know, you get past, say, you know, November, December, January, February, maybe March. Once you get past those months, you know, you're clear from April till, you know, sometime in November again. Really depends on how, when how hot was your summer? You know, my air conditioning bills are not nearly as high as my heating bills, even though they are running on the same electricity. You know. But yeah, I mean, you can grit it out for 3 months, you know, November, we'll say December, January, February, roughly. With, you know, December, January probably being the worst months, I'd say. And then, yeah, you're on the other side of it and you don't worry about it. And then, you know, you become me, you know, you're me. So as the temperatures start getting warmer in, you know, April, it's more difficult to sleep because it's so fucking hot upstairs. You know, you're like, I wish it was winter again so it wasn't so fucking hot all the time. I could sleep better. And then it's like, nah, you don't really want that, Chris, because you don't want to pay the bill for it. I'm hard to please, I guess. Or perhaps, I mean, there's 2 days of looking at it. Either I'm hard to please and I'm never happy about anything, or I see, you know, the good and the bad in every season, you know. I'm sure a lot of people are more quite the opposite. They're probably like, I love summer. I love going out and having barbecues and picnics and and getting outside and running around like a crazy person, sweating and wearing shorts. And then the winter time I get to bundle up and it's all nice and cozy in my house. Let me drink my hot chocolate, and I love them. I love all seasons, you know. But I'm like, I don't like paying bills in the winter, but I have trouble sleeping in the summertime. I'm never happy. I don't know. I've got some I don't know what kind of news coming up here soon. My the company I work at, the former owner, majority stakeholder owner, whatever you want to call him, has retired, or is in the process of retiring. And he has sold his majority share of the company to one of the other investors in our company. So now we have a new owner, if you will. And when you have changes in your management system, you always worry, particularly when it's the very top of the mountain, about changes that are coming or may come. Particularly when, you know, there are different, there's different philosophies on running a business. You know, obviously, everyone wants to make money, make profit. That's always a big thing. That's a good thing. I'm not saying no one should ever make profit, but this concept of, where you try to make your business more efficient so it becomes more profitable. It's like one of those, whatever you call it, graphs where the farther, you can become more profitable as technology increases, which allows you to produce more for less money. Then you still charge the same amount as you would because of inflation and other economic factors. So you charge more for the product that cost you less to make. But sort of get to my point. A lot of times, what in the 1950s took 100 people to make, might take 50 people to make, or 60 people to make, or 50 or 40 or 30 or whatever the number is now. Okay. And I understand things have shifted, so they moved a lot of stuff overseas because it costs less to get the materials, send it wherever, the materials wherever. We'll say you domestically, just for an argument, send them overseas, have them make it, send it back to us, we put it on a shelf, we sell it, we make a profit, or even more complicated than that. You make the cotton in the United States, you send it over to India to have them make the t-shirts, then the t-shirts come over to somewhere else, like let's say China or India, or we already said India, didn't we? Somewhere else, we'll say China or Vietnam, and then they take the blank colored shirts and they put the graphics on them, or whatever else needs to be done with them, and then they come over in boxes to us, and then we put them for sale on our shelves, and we make a profit off of that. Even though, you took the cotton, you had to buy the cotton, you had to ship the cotton. Cotton had to go overseas, which is not terrible, but not great either. Then it has to go from one country to another country so that the blank t-shirts that are made in bulk can be individualized. Then once they're individualized, they come back to the United States, go on a shelf, and we sell them for however many dollars. We'll say $10, $15, we'll say, for a t-shirt, okay? And maybe more, depending on what brand we're talking about, okay? And then, you have a company, small business, whatever you want to call it, and they make a profit. And if they have, people who are marketing people, they get paid. Everybody gets their wages, essentially. But in the end, the company makes money after all that's said and done. And the obvious answer to this is to eliminate any unnecessary expenses. So, for instance, if it was less expensive to build, you know, a factory or make the shirts in the United States, then you would save on shipping overseas. You would save, but this is where the problem is the labor in the United States is much higher, so it's much more difficult to say make 1,000 t-shirts in which each t-shirt cost, say, you know, $3 to make after everything's said and done, versus doing it in the United States where labor is makes up a large portion of that. You know, it would make up more cost than it would, say, across the seas. I don't know. But sort of went on a long tangent there. But when new management comes in, you're not 100% sure what the plan is. You obviously hope the plan is, well, you know, everything will continue as it did, and the people that are, the owner owns the company, obviously, but he's going to leave the people in place to continue to run the business, and then you're going to look at it and you're going to see how can we make the business more efficient, and the hope, like I said, on at least from my angle, is that they leave, like I said, the people in charge. I get to keep my job, obviously. No one loses their job or gets downsized or whatever, but there's obviously that fear as well that, because this guy owns the company, he may own another business, which he probably does because he's got, money to invest in the business I work at, so he probably has other businesses. So the fear is, of course, that, you have, say, a customer service team that helps out, or you have a purchaser, or you have an accounting team, and you can just say, well, we don't need the 4 people that are in accounting down at your place when we can add 1 or 2 people to our current staff, and we'll handle the accounting for both businesses, and the same thing can go for purchasing and everything else. And that's before we even bring in the fear of AI, or computers completely taking over human jobs. I mean, there's certain things that, like, seem, at least right now, seem like speculation. They seem like you're playing pretend a little bit with what AI is capable of. Yeah, maybe, I mean, we've been talking about robots for, having robotic people and humans for 100 years plus now, you know what I mean? Like, I used to imagine, back in, the start of cinema, you'd have these big boxy robots that, would take care of everything, and then that evolved, depending on people's point of view, into more human-like, renderings of, what human beings are. And I think there's a lot more left to do right now, to really get robots to the point where they are not only marketable, but, are mass marketable, and are not just sort of an interesting investment, And well, let's talk about something. On the one hand, you have AI, which basically takes what it has available, uses the information, and gives you a solution based on the information it's able to pull. With the internet, being fed for the past 25 to 30 years of information, obviously both written and now video and audio, it's got a lot to pull from, Now, whether it is programmed in such a way where it actually thinks, or it goes based on an algorithm, that makes it seem human, but it's just pulling information based on a, you know, a set of if-thens, you know. And, you know, the idea that a machine can do something more efficiently than a human being is not necessarily a bad thing, you know. If the, you know, the set, I'll give you a good work example, okay? So, there should be, well, there is a way in my accounting system that if I were to do a mass Excel document, okay, and I were to put down, and I have the fields all correct, and I have the vendor, the part, the amount I want, you know, all the other little factors that go into accounting for something in an inventory system. The accounting program's smart enough to take those pieces of information and break them up into their not only individual orders, but also to send them to the vendors. So let's say I've got 10 vendors and I'm going to buy 3 products, 2 to 3 products of each vendor, okay? It would be able to look at the first column and say, okay, I need to create a purchase order for this company. And I look in the second column and it'd say, okay, he wants these 2 parts or these 3 parts. And then it would look at the quantity, you know what I mean? And say, okay, he wants this many, you know, and then at this price, and then on this due date, and then, you know, any sort of like, okay, this falls under this particular account. So it's materials or, you know, finished products or something, you know what I mean? You have all that coded in your Excel sheet because everything falls into columns. You could have the program itself run, and it, like I said, it takes the data I put into it and it creates the orders, and it just goes, okay, we're going to first look at vendors. We're going to fill out this vendor, then we're going to move the next vendor, we're going to move the next vendor. And the amount of time it can take to do 100 orders, if I have the Excel sheet set up correctly, you know, would be a lot quicker than me hand typing in 100 orders. Now, where I'm still involved in that is I'm the one creating the Excel sheet and figuring out, and you know, you can set the system up obviously to you know, let you know, hey, you wanted a minimum of say 10 pieces on the shelf at all times. You're now below that threshold. You know, you can, at that point you could say, well, I automatically want you to reorder it, computer. But the computer will only do what you tell it to do. So it can't look at a part and go, okay, this part's obsoleted, you know, you shouldn't order it anymore. It just goes, okay, you've hit the minimum order quantity. You've given me, you know, an automated program that basically says, hey, I have to reorder this. There's not really any thought behind it, any evaluation behind it, any sort of outside information that goes into it, you know what I mean? It's just a if then. If this happens, then this happens. Or if, you know, it creates warnings, it creates orders, it does all this sort of mundane stuff that would take time and effort. And I'm rewinding. That's not standing. I can't let my... See, in the PSP version, they gave your characters 3 lives, 3 hearts. So if something were like that to happen, you fell off the side of a cliff, your character wouldn't be permanently dead. But in this version of the game, they are permanently dead. So don't let them fall off the edge, because that is by far the most dangerous part about this, at least this portion of the game. But there are other places that have pits like that where you could fall off the edge and it's just game over. So, you know, on the one hand, you know, there's this fear that, you know, you won't be necessary because you're a duplicate head. Or later on, the technology will take all of our jobs. Or it'll take a large enough chunk of jobs that the people who own, I'm gonna sound like a communist now, the people that own the businesses can dictate the wages, and they can continue to charge what they want so long as the people are willing to pay it, and that makes them more money. But it makes it sound like, well, if I run a grocery store and I own that grocery store, you know, I'm gonna you know, I'm gonna pay the people the least amount of money. I'll make the most amount of money. You know what I mean? And I'm gonna be millionaire. I'm gonna billionaire in a couple years. No, because there are other factors like competition, trying to keep good workers, paying them, you know, increasing their wages, you know, trying to retain good staff while eliminating bad staff, people leaving because they move, leaving because they find a better job, better pay, etc. And then it sort of becomes a self-defeating problem because you don't have any good workers, so you don't have good service. You don't have good service, you don't make money because people stop shopping with you. You know, I understand there's plenty of that. And even the people that do well for themselves, that own businesses and you know, put in the time and put in the grit, you know, or have the capital to start up a business, you know, they're entitled to make decisions that help them, you know, make them, you know, more profitable. I get that. And, you know, even though I'm talking about, you know, I'm sort of trying to dance around the idea that, you know, not every business owner is Elon Musk, or not every business owner, you know, is, you know, running a multi-billion-dollar company or making multi-billion dollars or millions of dollars every year in salary, just sort of sitting around flicking their beans, flicking their dicks, and because they've got the ship, you know, sailing down, you know, just basically sailing down the river, there's nothing they need to do. They'll just keep collecting their money, and they'll keep, you know, directing the ship as needed, you know. But in a lot of cases, it seems like stuff sort of pyramids its way up to the top, you know, where, you know, you, lowly bottom line assembly worker, you make the least amount of money, but you produce the most amount of goods. Okay, great, but you don't have a lot of knowledge, so, okay, so you should be paid X percentage of, say, what the owners paid. But what is that percentage? You know, what is fair, you know? And then, like I said, the fear is that eventually robots and AI and who knows what else is going to take over and take, you know, jobs. And then this economic system of, well, I provide you my labor and you give me money so I can live and eat, sort of falls apart when I don't have money to spend on food and I don't have money to spend on goods. So you don't have my money. No one has my money because I don't have money. And so you can't make profit. And if you're not making profit, how are you paying for goods and services or supplies? And it all sort of, in terms of the way the world is currently set up, it all sort of falls apart. You know? And that completely ignores any sort of other deeper conversation about, you know, AI becoming sentient and wanting to basically preserve itself over, you know, humanity. But that's a conversation for another day, I suppose.